I was initially going to do a best games of 2009 video, but I realized that I already reviewed most of the games that I loved from 2009, so doing a list of 2009 best games would be an exercise in futility. Instead, I present to you the best games of the decade. Turn-based strategy games may not be as prevalent as they were in the 90s, but Galactic Civilizations 2 Dreadlords is ample proof that the genre is hardly dying and is as relevant today as it was in the previous decade. In my humble opinion, real-time strategy games are not as much about strategy as they are about getting more done per second than your opponent. If you gather more resources, build your units quicker, explore more of a map than your opponent, then you're bound to succeed. Turn-based strategy games offer far more strategic depth than do their distant cousins, and this is very much evident with this game. Galactic Civilizations 2 is the epitome of strategy games and offers an experience that is unmatched in its genre. First, there is no multiplayer option for the game. Most real-time strategy games rely heavily on their multiplayer experience and the advantage of having real players provide a natural intelligence to bolster the credibility of a game while oftentimes neglecting entirely the single-player experience. In my opinion, going through a campaign mode is a far more rewarding experience than duking it out in the skirmish mode. And Galactic Civilizations 2 offers brilliant artificial intelligence for an extremely satisfying campaign that's varied with solid pacing and occasionally humorous and brilliant writing. Second, the game's depth and complexity is simply unmatched. Just one look at the vastness of the tech tree will convince you of this. While most strategy games will have you employing similar strategies for every match, gather resources, send a scout to explore the map, build barracks and other essential buildings, build an army, attack and defeat your enemies. This game offers more than one path to victory, and I'd argue that the path to victory is far more complex and less linear than they are in any other game. Stardock Entertainment is coming out with another turn-based strategy game called Elemental War of Magic in early 2010, and I'm betting they will continue to make turn-based strategy games relevant well into the next decade. Playing this again for the first time since its release made me realize something about the game that I've never noticed before. The game is a terrible shooter. I remember Dark Forces being a good shooter, and I thought that would be true as well of Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast, but it is absolutely horrible. The AI sucks donkey balls, and the guns feel... well, laser rifles were never my favorite to use in games, but let's just say I understand now why the stormtroopers always seem to miss in the movies. But this game isn't about the shooting, it's entirely about swinging your lightsaber and using force powers. Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 was the first game to give you a lightsaber to wield, but it was a terrible experience. Deflecting shots was near impossible, and trying to connect with your lightsaber while swinging away in first-person perspective was rather cumbersome. It was just easier and more effective to blast away with your rifle. Jedi Outcast perfects lightsaber swordplay. Growing up watching the original Star Wars trilogy, I always imagined being a Jedi and cutting down Imperial forces with your lightsaber and using force powers would be an awesome experience. Thanks to Jedi Outcast, now I know this to be true. Whip out your Gran Turismo and Forza cards and I will trump them all with GTR 2. This is a hardcore racing simulation for hardcore racing simulation fans, and its depth and realism is second to none. For its time, the graphics were simply gorgeous, and the sound, the purring of the engine, the squeals of the tires. Whip out your wheel and pedal, turn the realism all the way up, set graphical settings to max, and blast the volume. And you won't realize that you're playing a game until your mom bursts in and tells you to stop playing games and do your homework. Diablo 2 is quite simply the standard bearer of its genre, and that standard hasn't changed since its release. And the game has been released in 2000, over 9 years ago. Certainly, there have been a few good games released since, and have tried to overtake Diablo 2 and set a new standard for the genre, like Titan Quest and Torchlight, but none have matched its brilliance and appeal. I can't quite put my finger on what these games are missing. Perhaps the characters and special skills of each character are not as interesting or fun to use. Perhaps there's just something to the zany item names in Diablo 2 that warms my heart. Or perhaps the multiplayer experience is simply lacking in these other games. But whatever reason, I know this much. I'd rather play Diablo 2 again than play any of its clones. Much has been said of this game, especially regarding its humor, that I feel hardly necessary to say more. But I will add this. You'll appreciate the game more if you play other games that have been released since and have been clearly inspired by Portal, like Twin Sector. I've never realized just how well designed and intuitive the puzzles were and how fully realized the world and brilliant the writing are in Portal until I've played games like Twin Sector. My appreciation for the game grows every time I play it again. For its time, the graphics and AI are unmatched, but this isn't a game that you play just for the gunplay and to gawk at the pretty pictures and women. It's got a blend of side-splitting, tongue-in-cheek humor and wacky gadgets and wicked and sharp dialogue that are seamlessly integrated into this campy 60s spy world. There are only about 3 or 4 games that have made me actually laugh out loud, and Nulf 2 has done so in numerous occasions. This is all true of the original game as well, so why Nulf 2 and not Nulf 1? Both games are undoubtedly brilliant, and I could have easily included Nulf 1 on this list as well, but that would be redundant. The sequel is simply the more polished of the two. It's far more streamlined than the original and did away with some of the quirks of the original. Needless to say, both are terrific and deserve mention on this list. The game is most often praised for its role-playing elements, specifically the game giving players multiple paths to completing quests, and rightly so. But what I mainly love about this game is its world. And I don't mean just the source material that it's based on. No, other games have better source material, but I don't necessarily love the worlds these games are set in. My love of the game lies mainly in how fabulously Treyarch realized this vampire world. That includes the art, the writing, the voice acting, everything. I love exploring this world, and every new character that I meet is an absolute delight. Never has a world felt more believable despite its zaniness, and vibrant as it does in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. What's great about Half-Life 2 is that there are so many memorable sequences in the game. A Red Letter Day, We Don't Go to Ravenholm, Stand Traps, Nova Prospect, Anti-Citizen 1. These are some of the 14 chapter names in the game, and they all invoke in me very specific scenarios and images and cutscenes that are forever etched in my little brain. Ever-changing scenarios and terrific scripted sequences are what this game is most known for. Some will say that the gunplay isn't as well done as it is in other games, but I disrespectfully disagree. Sure, even the original Half-Life has better gunplay for the most part, but the original Half-Life doesn't have a gravity gun. Half-Life 2 may not be the first game to use a gravity gun-like device, but it is the first to popularize it. More than that, it remains today the best implementation of such a device. Other games have imitated and have succeeded in doing so for the most part, but nowhere is the use of such a device as fun as it is in Half-Life 2. Actually, that's not quite true. There is one game in which the gravity gun is more fun to use than in this game, Half-Life 2 Episode 2. There are many role-playing games that feature more in-depth role-playing elements and better and more interesting stories, but nowhere is it more fun to fight big-ass scary monsters as it is in Baldur's Gate 2. So great are the tactical battles that Dragon Age Origins basically kept the formula intact while adding some twists like 3D terrain. In fact, this is what makes BG2 so much better than BG1. They doubled the level cap, and they gave you some awesome powers that make you feel like a badass motherfucker. There's absolutely nothing that compares to taking your badass self and your almost equally badass party mates and going up against an even more badass dragon. For the tactical combat and all the things that affect the combat experience like the stats and loot systems alone, BG2 remains my favorite role-playing game of all time. I have a review of Team Fortress 2. You can check it out by clicking on the link in the lower right side of this video. All I will say is that while all multiplayer games have a learning curve, and the more you play the games, the more you learn about how to play the games, no multiplayer is as easy to get into and is as difficult to master, whatever your talent level may be, as Team Fortress 2. I've played over 700 hours and mostly on one map, and I'm still learning little nuances about the game and improving every time I play. Add to that wicked humor and great style, and Team Fortress 2 is not only the best game of this decade, but easily the best game of all time.